Hello, my loves, and welcome to this, the fourth episode of Women Doing Their Thing. I'm your host, Freddie, coming to you from a chilly London today. It is super, super chilly here. I've just been out for a walk in Brockwell Park. Um, the dogs are all looking very cute and fine in their winter wear, and I'm curled up and warm back at home now. It's this kind of dreamy, liminal few days in between Christmas and New Year's, and I am super fond of this time of year. If I'm completely honest, I love how it feels. I get to have London all to myself in a sort of a way. The spirits of the city are just so mystical sometimes. And there are lots fewer folks out running in the park, and there's a whole bunch more free poles and pole class, and I get to have really great chats with the clients at work. There's also been an endless supply of baked goods making their way through our house. It has been absolutely lush, I've got to say. So this morning I woke up and I was feeling stiff as a board, like my shoulders and my hammies were creaky as all hell. And it's the kind of stiff and creaky that's so satisfying though, because it was the result of a really, really delicious exotic pole class that I did yesterday. And this class was much faster than I'm used to moving, so it was a new kind of challenging. And we were also dancing to erotica, Madonna's tune erotica. I'm going to share it in the stories on Insta. And I just love so much how that resonance of having moved at one point yesterday is something that I can wake up with this morning, and I can still feel it right now. How good is that? So I peeled myself off the bed and I went downstairs to make a coffee, and I was doing this kind of funny John Wayne shuffle back up the stairs. And I ended up going on this like unanticipated little journey back through time. I don't know if it feels this way for you too sometimes, but like the life that I live right now, I mean, it's so far removed from the life that I had growing up as a kid. I don't know if I would have even ever imagined this life for myself when I was younger. Like, it's so much better than anything that I could have imagined for myself. And it's also kind of funny to imagine this because there was one point where my relationship with movement and exercise was so turbulent that just the idea that I could devote time to moving only in ways that I love would have never occurred to me. It would never have occurred to me that that was a possibility. And so, just to kind of like give you a little bit of the backstory, as a teenager, I was anorexic and I was also a compulsive overexerciser. Like, this is a very common sort of combination. And one of the reasons why I exercised to that extent was because it helped me keep my mind quiet, right? Like, this was back in the day before I learned anything about the negativity bias or, you know, before I had this nuanced understanding that I have now of the complexity of living systems. And so, as a teenager, I managed my mental health in all sorts of really dysfunctional, disorganized ways, and exercise was one of them. So, I would exercise to the point that I'd basically, I kind of blew a fuse. Like, I would overdo it to the extent that I'd totally gone over threshold and my body would kind of break down in protest. And I did that for a long time, but through the process of doing that would just make everything in my head feel quiet. And we all have our methods or our version of doing this, right? It doesn't have to be to that extreme or intensity. Like, clients will often come to me and talk about how they get so angry that they completely clam up and they go quiet, or like there's the other extreme where you get so angry that you just blow your lid and you say stuff that you really, really wish you'd never said. Or there's also like the example of when people work so hard that at the end of the day, when you get home, you're completely spent and unavailable for anything else. Or Another one, you push yourself for years and years and years, and eventually you end up with chronic fatigue or some other kind of condition, or you study so hard that you get to a point where nothing makes sense to you anymore, right? That kind of like the lights are on but nobody's home kind of feeling. It takes so much training to kind of find this middle ground. That's kind of what my coaching work is devoted to, in a way, helping us all find that sort of kind, compassionate midway so that life can be light and filled with joy. So, anyway, we're back with me as a teenager, and I was in treatment for anorexia. And at the time, the dominant treatment model was the medical model. That was, that consisted of hospitalization and medication. Um, my mum decided very early on that that was not going to be the path for me, because she'd witnessed my dad's slow and tragic decline. He had also received psychiatric treatment for his mental health, but he died by suicide. So she was very much like, that is not going to be the outcome for my only kid. I mean, this was so brave and courageous of her, right? Because she was also, she was a single parent. This was back in Ireland in the 1990s, by the way. And so it was really hard then to find therapists that were skilled in working with eating disorders. I also remember like a lot that religion got mixed in with therapy. There was a lot of God talk in therapy back then, and that was just not my vibe in one way, in like at all. I wasn't a particularly religious kid. Um, I did kind of feel sort of possessed sometimes, though. Um, I would notice that there were these times where I felt like completely at peace and all was okay, but then out of nowhere, my mind would feel like a war zone. Now, the interesting thing is, I was reflecting on this morning. This is sort of like a kind of a good example of emergence, right? So emergence is organic and spontaneous. And in amongst chaos, order emerges spontaneously, right? So this is kind of like these moments of where like the peace amongst the chaos rides out, shines, that's where the light shines. So that's an example of that happening for me back then. And of course now I know that we can sort of create and reinforce the conditions for this to happen more easily or frequently and regularly through the organic intelligence techniques that I teach. Back then, therapy was just not anywhere close to as nuanced as it is now. It was very top down. So it was all about controlling yourself and being very driven in your behavior, and kind of like, you know, it really discounted the fact that there were all of these processes that happen in our bodies, like organically. And one of the demands that I was under when I was anorexic was to gain and maintain weight, right? And, when I was exercising compulsively, this just wasn't happening. And I had no idea of, what do you call it? I had no idea of how to not do things to excess, basically, back then. So I was essentially forced to stop exercising completely. Actually, this is sometimes something that you will be advised to do when you're in this cycle of over exercising. Actually, just like completely stopping for a time, and then learning to build back up exercise in a more sort of healthy, organic kind of way. Anyway, back then, it was just nothing for me. I had become, at that young age, what was I, maybe 15, 16, something like that, so incredibly practiced in overriding most of the sensations in my body, most of the feedback that I was receiving. And I definitely learned to override feeling tired. I mean, this was back in the day when my sleep problems probably started. Like, for until my early 30s, um, the idea of rest was pretty far removed from my physical vocabulary. Basically, there was a time in my life where I would only sleep when my body shut down completely. And this is just to kind of say, on this is one side of the story. In one way, I was on a really, I was just on a downward spiral, right? But then one day, and I remember this being around 16, a group of us went to Jampaling. And Jampaling is a Buddhist monastery in Cavan, where I grew up. And you drive through the gates of Jampaling and something happens. You're transported to, it's like a different atmosphere, different time, different place, different reality. Maybe you could say it's a clearer reality. Reality. And there are all sorts of gorgeous things there. These really colourful prayer flags tied up between the trees, and the rooms smell of incense, and there are welcoming volunteers. I mean, it's the exact same to this day. It's still a very wonderful, welcoming place. And so that day, I went and I hung out in the shrine room for a while. And when I was spending time in there, one of the nuns showed me how to sit to meditate. And then she guided me through a meditation. Now, I'd never had this experience before of someone introducing me to, I guess you could call it mind training. Like, this experience of meditation put some sort of order on my mind, and in a very different way to therapy too. Like, there was this really kind, compassionate sort of foundation to it. And strangely, even though the environments were very different, there was something very much like the vibe of being in church when I was a kid that I connected with sitting in that shrine room. I felt safe and I felt connected to the sacred. Now, I love words, so let's just for a second look at the origins of the word sacred. It comes from the Latin word sacer, S-A-C-E-R, and that it essentially means dedicated to divinity. So that day, I got this glimpse of what was under the hood of, quote unquote, religion, but I got this insight into the substance that unites it all. And I started to realize that there are these common themes that run through all of these different religions. The other sweet thing about Jampaling is its connection to the White Tara. The White Tara is a Buddhist goddess associated with compassion and healing. So, of course, how perfect that I ended up there at that time in my life where my system was so in need of respite. From this day on, my relationship with Buddhism began, basically. If you don't know what the White Tower looks like, have a little Google, because there are so many interpretations of her and many are incredibly exquisite. Now, there wasn't much imagery in the little church that I would go to when I was a kid, and I found the images of Jesus and the cross and all of that kind of thing was very austere, but the White Tara, I was all over the White Tara. I loved how tranquil she appeared. Looking at her image helped me find that in me. So Buddhism became one of my holy doorways. And let's look at this word holy, right? Again, it's one of those words that's maybe been bent out of shape or that we're kind of like we can be resistant to because of its association with religion. Actually, the word holy comes from the old German Heilig, which means blessed. And this feels like it's part of that weave of connection to the sacred and divinity. So at this time where I couldn't see the light in myself, these places and teachings occurred for me that did it for me. It was almost like they held my hand. They primed my system to one day know the sacred and holy in me organically and much more spontaneously. I've been working with this group of women recently. They're going through major life transitions. And I've been working with them for a few weeks, and from week to week, as the group gets together, I can see this alchemy happen. And from week to week, the container becomes stronger and lighter, and they're more capable of attuning to the good stuff. It's kind of like this journey from negative intensity to positive intensity, right? They're becoming capable of stabilizing blue, of like attuning to pleasure. One of the women had had a really hard week this week, and she was talking about how she felt like she'd lost herself. You know, she was being quite hard on herself. She's talking about how she'd had these good weeks, but this week had been so tricky that it was like there wasn't a scrap of that goodness left. And this image of the White Tower came to my mind. And I asked, so what are the images that bring you respite? In these times that you feel like you've lost this in yourself, are there some images that can kind of hold it for you? And the room went quiet in this kind of, you know, that quality of like a sacred silence, like it's full yet quiet. And one by one, the women started offering up these images. They were nothing like what I'd expected. They were much better. One of the women said, I have this image of Mary on my altar, and if I'm having a hard time, I like to just put it in my pocket or have it in my purse, and I'll just take it out when I need to pick me up. And one of them said, just the green sprawling fields come to mind, like I'm flying over them. And another one offered, you know, there's this oracle deck that I have, and I'll just pick up one of the cards, any of the cards. It doesn't matter what one I get. Like, it's this lovely deck, and every time I get a card from it, it makes me feel better. And as you're listening, you might like to try this for yourself, actually. You know, what are these images? What are the images that have this, that evoke this in you? What are the images that make you, you? At the end of that session with them the other day, I felt compelled to read them the Song of Amergin. If you don't know anything about it, it's an ancient poem by a legendary Irish bard called Amergin. It actually reminds me of this other piece of writing called The Thunder Perfect Mind. I'll link to both of them in the show notes, but I'm going to read you a little of the Song of Amergin now. There are many different interpretations of it. This is just one that I found on the web, which I quite like. And perhaps even if you had the time, or if you were curious, you might like to write your own version of the Song of Amergin, the Song of You. So here it is. I am wind on the sea. I am ocean wave. I am roar of sea. I am stag of 7 tines. I am hawk on a cliff. I am shining tear of the sun. I am fairest among herbs. I am boar for boldness. I am salmon in pool. I am a lake on a plain. I am a hill of poetry. I am a word of skill. I am the point of a weapon that pours forth combat. I am God who fashions fire for a head. Who knows the secrets of the unhewn dolmen? Who but I announces the ages of the moon? Who but I know the place where falleth the sunset? Who calls the cattle from the house of Tethra? On whom do the cattle of Tethra smile? Who is the troop, the god who fashions edges in a fortress of gangrene? I am a song on a spear. Enchantments of wind. Thank you, my loves. Thank you for being here.